Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for joining tonight's webinar on blackgrass and combating it through improved soil health. This is the first in our autumn and winter webinar series looking at various regenerative agriculture and soil health topics. For those of you who haven't heard of us before, we're Regenerate Outcomes, and Regenerate Outcomes supports farms to improve soil health through one-to-one mentoring with experienced regenerative farmers and soil health experts. We also carry out soil carbon baselines so that farmers can start to measure and be rewarded for the carbon they're locking up in their soil. So on to tonight. We are very pleased to have a crack team with us to discuss blackgrass and how to combat it. When we're speaking with farmers, the number one thing that comes up time and time again is blackgrass. So that's why we put on this webinar this evening. We're pleased to have Carl Richardville with us, who is one of our mentors. He's joined by Ian Gould, who is director at Oakbank Game and Conservation, who provide advice on habitat creation and environmental stewardship schemes. And we've also got two farmers who are part of the Regenerate Outcomes program, George Hosier, who's a beef and arable farm from Wiltshire, and John Charity, who's an arable farmer from Lincolnshire. There'll be plenty of time available at the end for Q&A. Please enter any questions that you have during the presentations in the chat, and then Kyle will answer them after the presentation. So yeah, over to you, Kyle.
Hey, thanks, Jake. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'll share my screen here so we can get started. So I've been living in the United Kingdom for over a year and a half now. So I've got a little bit of experience with blackgrass, but I just wanted to, more than anything, talk about this idea of succession. So my colleague, Doug Peterson, he likes to say if there's two things he would teach a farmer, it's this idea of succession and carbon to nitrogen ratios. So tonight we're going to be talking about that first one, the idea of succession. So, many blackgrass presentations, they're great. They have such great information, but I just wanted to do things a little differently today. So I want to take it back, way back to the leading scientific theory of how the planet formed actually. And what they think is early on, it was a hot ball of molten rock actually, and then it cooled into something that looks like a Cadbury egg with cream filling in the middle, and that's what we see today. Under each of our feet is this roiling, boiling, molten material below this thin, rocky, soily environment that we see. So how did a planet go from bare rock to abundantly rich with life like we see today? And it's this idea of succession. So it's a very strongly believed, and there's a lot of evidence to show that this happens in landscapes. So first we'll talk about primary succession. So going from absolute bare rock to soil, it takes these pioneer species, and a lot of times they're what we call lichens. Sorry, somebody's mic is on and it's kind of loud. I'm not sure who it is, but thank you. So these lichens are actually a team. It's a team between photosynthesizing algae and fungus. So the fungus degrades the rock for the minerals in it, and the algae can photosynthesize and create that sugar, that food. And over many periods of time, that rock gets broken down into finer material, and the living cells of the organisms becomes the first organic matter. And so as you can see, going from lichens, eventually you can create an environment that supports these small annual plants, and then eventually the perennial plants. And if the topography and the climate and everything else is a certain way, it will want to become a forested climax community. Or if you're in the middle of the US, like Gay Brown, for example, it'll want to be a grassland climax community. But if you look at this picture, look at how that depth of the soil is created with each of those species over time. And that's how soil over time is created. So we also have secondary succession. So say that primary succession has already occurred. We have a major disturbance like a fire or even a plowing event. And from a chemical standpoint, something like a huge application of pesticide. We see this barren environment once again, and it's those annual plants, those early pioneer species that jump into action and start this process over again to get the ball rolling. So this is an artistic rendering of what they think Earth might have looked like a really long time ago. And actually, fun fact, the moon is moving away from us about 3 centimeters a year. So early on, the moonrise might have been that big. But interestingly, those lichens had to team up and get onto the land and colonize that rocky surface. They were the very first ones to start the whole process. So those early successional species figure out how to thrive in those really harsh conditions. They paved the way for the later successional species like us over time. So this is actually, a fun fact for your pub quiz. It's the newest piece of land on Earth. It's called Surtsey Island, south of Iceland. And it started erupting in 1963 and stopped in 67. So in 1967, there was this very hot piece of rock, and it eventually cooled, and it only took about 50 years. And in 2019, they've already found 75 species of complex vascular plants, over 70 species of those lichens, like I mentioned, and 24 species of fungi. And interestingly enough, it's the seabirds and the seals that have helped that island and those pockets of diversity develop. So that's just another example and reason why animal integration on the land is so absolutely important. And when we take these animals off of the landscape, there are a lot of unintentional consequences we don't really understand. So let's think about that when we're figuring out how best to manage the land. So let's think about what an early successional landscape is and what it looks like. So there's a lot of compaction. Think of bare rock that's as compact as it gets. But even a dead, compacted soil, I would consider an early successional landscape. There's not a lot of airflow in and out of the soil. There's a lot of wasted solar energy. So if something can come in and capture that solar energy, it has a major advantage over other species. There's poor water cycling, poor nutrient cycling. But interestingly, there's often an abundance of nutrients present in that early successional landscape. So in minerals, we don't think of it like that, but rock to a microbe is chock full of nutrients. And so if they can bring those nutrients from the rock to their living bodies, now those nutrients can be used for biological processes. Or even like deserts, desert clays often have enormous amounts of nutrients locked up in them. And some of our colleagues who are ranching in the Mexican desert have figured out that if you can get that ball rolling, you can produce prodigious amounts of biology and plant growth. And there's also little life and diversity, obviously, which leads to little competition. So really what this means is early successional landscapes have a very, very poor functioning of the 4 ecosystem processes. Here are a couple examples just in everyday life. We've seen these, we know these, and this is Mother Nature trying to cover herself. Think about a sidewalk. Those little splotches are actually those lichens trying to restart this process. I think about it when I see the mosses growing in our fields in between the cereal crops. There's nothing photosynthesizing there. There's water, there's abundant nutrients, especially there's a lot of inorganic fertilizer use in that field. And Mother Nature is just trying to cover herself and start that process once again. And here's an interesting video I saw on one of my walks here in town. This blanket of moss that had been there for a long time, I would imagine. So what I do is I pick off a little piece, pick it up, and you can see underneath that soil that is being formed from sidewalk. And that's the whole process right there. Those rock grains are mixed with the dead moss cells, which act as the organic matter and create the soil. And that's exactly what soil is. It's broken rock, broken down rock, plus living organism stuff, and that's how we get our soil. So the whole point of that is to say there is no such thing as a good or bad species in nature. And that's really the mindset paradigm shift that regenerative producers that really make strides in the progress, that's the paradigm shift that happens in their mind. Every species has a role in the ecosystem. It just so happens that some of them don't fit into our human agenda. So in ecology, they have a spectrum upon which organisms fall. On one side are the R strategists, or those that thrive in the early succession landscapes. So some of their characteristics, they're quick to sexual maturity. They produce huge amounts of offspring in only 1 or 2 breeding events. And they usually have boom and bust populations, and they thrive in those unpredictable and unstable environments. So that picture there is like Mad Max. It's like this dystopian desert world, and it's those opportunists, those hardy species that really thrive. And then we have the late succession K strategists, which are more like us. They're slower to sexual maturity, small number of offsprings, and they have many breeding events, and they thrive in predictable and stable environments. So here's a growth curve. The red represents those R hardy species, boom and then bust populations like you see. And then the K strategists like us that tend to find that carrying capacity line and hover around it. So some examples of those R strategists are many bacteria, disease-causing fungi, even decomposing fungi, lichens, like I mentioned, even insects and rodents. And then K strategists, symbiotic fungi, behave more like late successional species, long-lived nematodes, large mammals like whales, giraffes, and us. But the point here is that weeds are our strategists. The vast majority of weeds behave and they thrive in those early successional landscapes. So what this means is weeds, and if you're thinking about insect pests, cabbage, stem flea beetle, pathogenic microbes, fungi, bacteria, those things, they're the symptom actually. The real disease is the environment that we have created that causes them to thrive. We've created that environment that matches their niche. And a lot of times it's that early successional landscape that we've created. So looking specifically at weeds, what is their home field advantage? What do they like? They like that compact soil. It's waterlogged, it's anaerobic, it's bare, so there's little competition. They can get off to a quick start and maybe even crowd everything out. A lot of them love large pools of available nitrate, especially from fertilizer. And they do well in low fungal to bacteria ratio environments. So if we think about a practice like chronic tillage, tillage is a tool in the toolbox, but chronic tillage can have the effect of breaking aggregates and compacting that soil, leaving the soil bare. It can increase mineralization rates of nutrients quicker than the plant life can take it up. And so there could be unnaturally high levels of nitrate, for example, where a weed could flourish. And it reduces that fungal to bacteria ratio because the fungi bodies are longer and spindly and more sensitive to that type of event. So really, looking at this early successional, mid-late successional chart, it's a fungal to bacteria ratio on the right. So our weeds actually, they prefer that early successional, lower fungal to bacteria ratio environment. Whereas the things that we're trying to grow and sell and make some money from, annual crops, vegetables, row crops, there are mid and late successional species that like the higher fungal to bacteria ratio environments. And this study out of the US was actually very interesting. And the gist of it is they inoculated early successional plants and late successional plants with beneficial fungi. And they found that the early successional plants grew 40% smaller with the arbuscular mycorrhizal inoculations, whereas the late successional plants grew almost 400 times larger. So how do you build those soil fungal populations? How do you build aggregation? How do you build a healthier soil environment to mimic a late successional landscape? Really, it comes down to the 6 principles of soil health that many organizations agree on. It's knowing your context, disturbing less, covering and building surface soil armor, diversity, mixing things up, keeping living soil roots in the soil as long as possible, and getting those animals back onto the landscape. So whenever I'm thinking about a specific species, whether it's weeds, pests, pathogens. I always think of this quote by Sun Tzu in The Art of War. He says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And the only thing I would disagree with in this example is that we don't want to think of blackgrass or those as our enemy. We want to think of them as our companion and ecological creation. So we would benefit from getting to know them better. So what about blackgrass? It is an annual, and it can produce up to 1,000 seeds per plant. And some research shows that it has 50,000 or more seeds per square meter in some fields. It thrives in those highly disturbed soils. And I couldn't find much information on its nutrient use efficiency. Does it really like nitrates, and how does it interact with the fungal populations? But the point is that it is an R successional strategist species, early successional through and through. And what I think is important to understand is its secret weapon, and it's this straw-like tissue called an parenchyma. And this allows the plant to shuttle oxygen from the above ground portion to the below ground portion. And that's what allows it to thrive in those waterlogged and compacted environments. So, we often think of plants as breathing out oxygen for us through photosynthesis, but photosynthesis just creates the food for the plant. To use that food, plants are aerobic just like we are. So they have to use oxygen to use that food and to do the things they need to do. So if a root is in a compacted, waterlogged soil, it can't get oxygen very well to do the things it needs to do, such as grow, find new channels in the soil for nutrients. If there is no parenchyma, if there's no oxygen exchange to below. And this research from Rothamsted that came out this year actually showed that they waterlogged the field, and they had wheat, and then they had blackgrass. And they found that the waterlogged wheat was obviously smaller, whereas the blackgrass was similar or even larger than the control plots. And that blackgrass could flourish when the soil was totally 100% saturated for up to 3 weeks. So think about how much of an advantage blackgrass has on our crops if it can grow for 21 days straight. And interestingly, the more herbicide resistant the population was, the more waterlogging tolerant it was. And so that got me thinking that, a lot of these conventional practices, whether it's with agriculture or with, antibiotics and human health, sometimes we're selecting for stronger species over time by using these practices like herbicides and antibiotics. So we got to be very careful on how we use them. Dr. Stephen Moss had a great talk at Groundswell that I've put the link here. If we share the slides, you can click on it and see for yourself. But he had 5 key points about blackgrass that I thought were important to share for everybody tonight. And the first is seed longevity. So they found that there's about a 75% loss of viability in the seed bank every year. So it takes about 5 years, at least 5 years of really intentional action to reduce a new input of seeds to get to what you could consider maybe a comfortable level. The second is seedling depth. So seeds can only germinate when they're 5 centimeters or shallower. So, something like an inverted till could inadvertently bring a lot of seeds back up to the surface. So we want to try and avoid that. Seedling emergence, we all know that most of them emerge in that September, October timeframe. For the seedlings shed from mid-June to harvest. So if we're going to try and prevent seeds from being input back in the soil, that's the time period where we really need to be careful, because that's when they are falling. So preventing them from getting to that state obviously is the best strategy. And lastly, population dynamics, how their population grows over time. They can increase 10 times their population every single year. And so what they estimate is it takes about a 95% control rate in new seed input to stop a buildup year to year. And Dr. Moss aggregated some studies based on plowing, based on different strategies, basically. And the important point to look at here is that there is no silver bullet in blackgrass management. And we've got a lot of smart minds on it, and if there was, they would have already found it. But something like plowing, negative effect, that there was more blackgrass after the plowing, where there was almost 100% control. The same with delayed drilling in the autumn. some studies showed that there were higher blackgrass populations, whereas some showed that it virtually eliminated it. So the same goes for higher seed rates using competitive hybrids. Spring cropping shows very promising results. And even something like fallowing and grass lays, where they don't have enough data to have a percentage, but they have found encouraging results. So why not just spray the blackgrass? Well, unfortunately, there's a high level of herbicide resistance, and that's something that early successional species inadvertently do well, or advertently, but because they produce so quickly and they produce so many offspring, that increases the chances of mutations that might happen to help them survive whatever treatment is thrown at them better. So that's, again, antibiotics. So overuse of antibiotics has created these super bugs in our guts and our bodies. And the same can be said with this herbicide resistance. So Dr. Moss says that 41 herbicides have been introduced for blackgrass control in the last 60 years, and resistance now occurs in nearly all of them. So thinking that we're just going to solve the issue with chemistry doesn't look promising. And this is kind of a public service announcement for herbicide use into the future for you arable operators. There's some reason for pessimism in the herbicide active ingredient development world for various reasons, but I thought this quote from Bob Rader, head of research and development for Bayer's crop science division, was pertinent and worth discussing. So he said, "We're really desperate for new modes of action. 2 decades ago, companies commercialized a product for every 50,000 candidates, but now it's upped, and it takes 100,000 to 150,000 attempts." And an agrobio investor, a UK-based firm, says that over the last 2 decades, chemical companies have reduced the share of revenue devoted to research and development and are introducing fewer products. And from what I can understand, a lot of that has to do with increasing environmental regulations. So these companies, it can take them 10 plus years to bring a product to market, and it can cost 500 million, $500 million in pounds in investment, and companies aren't willing to put the money. They don't think the return on investment is going to be in the future. So for you arable farmers, design a weed management system that isn't relying on the herbicides, because they might not be there in moving forward in the future. So like I said, it's about designing a system to give your crops that home field advantage over the weeds. So creating that later successional landscape in the soil, improving that water and air cycle, improving compaction aeration, building the organic matter levels in the soil to feed those beneficial soil microbes like the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, building that soil carbon sponge to handle the water more efficiently and capture that solar energy, cycle nutrients, and promote all kinds of diversity of life. Dr. Moss has this 5-for-5 integrated weed management system that I thought was interesting to put in here. So thinking about, can you use a timely cultivation? How do you use sowing date, competition to shade out the weed, herbicides, and stop how you can stop seeding new seeds from getting to the soil. So I'll end here by providing a few case studies on beneficial practices that have worked in the UK. So there's a project called Project Lamport, and what they use is fall cover cropping and catch cropping, trap cropping, excuse me, and moving towards spring cropping.
Kyle, sorry to interrupt, Kyle. Your slides have frozen. Do you want to try resharing your screen?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
No.
Let me know if you can see it again. Are you able to see the 5-for-5?
Not yet. Looks like it's thinking about it.
Okay. I apologize. Let me try and move closer to a router. Maybe that'll help. Still nothing?
Still nothing.
Okay.
I just crack on, Carl, and then hopefully it'll pop up.
Okay, I'll try sharing one more time, and if that doesn't work, then I'll just keep going. Let's do a cappella. I'll try it one more time here. Do you see anything, Jake?
No, nothing, sadly.
I'm really sorry.
No problem.
Okay,
No.
I'm almost finished up, so sorry, folks. I'll do my best to describe it. So, fall cover cropping and spring cropping was found to virtually eliminate blackgrass in this study called the Project Lamport, and black oats and phacelia were the most successful cover crop mix to provide that blackgrass cover. And I thought that was very interesting. It makes sense to me because black oats are extremely well adept to feeding mycorrhizal fungal populations in the soil. So that made sense to me. Another thing that's been another practice that's proven successful is putting a field down to an herbal lay, putting it down to grass and grazing it. So there's an Oxfordshire farm by Garth Weston that he showed that 4-year grass lay grazed by his sheep. Not only was he fattening 90% of his lambs, which was up from about 10% in the past, his first wheat out of that 4-year grass lay yielded 10 ton per hectare with virtually no signs of any troublesome blackgrass. And again, John Pazzi, who's pretty much my neighbor in Suffolk and Bury St. Edmunds, he also had a trial of white clover and perennial ryegrass for 2 to 3 years and grazed them with his sheep to good success. And lastly, if from what I could read, if you do need to plant earlier in the autumn, think about barley. Winter barley is more competitive than wheat, so it can get off to a better start and crowd out some of that blackgrass better than the wheat will. So at the end of the day, it's a systems approach that we need to take, especially moving into the future with less chemistry that we'll be able to use moving forward. It's going to be about aggregating that soil, aerating the soil, feeding the soil microbes, practices like maybe spring cropping, delayed autumn cropping, livestock grazing, all of those. And the important thing is to question everything and use your observations, use your 5 senses. If there's a patch of blackgrass or a field that's particularly bad, dig into the soil, look at the aggregation, smell the soil. Does it smell earthy? Does it smell anaerobic and musty and metallic? Those would give you good indications of water cycling and nutrient cycling, and whether you are, or you have, or your predecessor has created that home field advantage for the blackgrass to thrive. And then think about ways to create that system where you can change that environment. So that's it for me. I really apologize for my screen locking up, everyone, but thank you for your time, and I will now pass it to Ian Gould for his portion of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone. So I thought we were having a discussion, so I don't actually have a presentation as such, but I can certainly back up several of the things that Kyle has been saying. If you haven't ever been to Lamport, I would strongly recommend a visit to their open days, which are normally the end of June, July. And huge credit has to go to AgriVista for funding that for a number of years, and the great team that they've got there with both their own staff and people like David Purdy and Philip Wright, who are well worth the visit, frankly, from wherever you are in the world, let alone in England. I think it would be time well spent if blackgrass is something you're struggling with. But I'm not sort of going to take a entirely regenerative view on the approach to blackgrass, because frankly, the thing, sometimes I think when people are talking about regenerative farming, the reasons for it are they feel like you're trying to solve somebody else's problem. and blackgrass is very much your problem if you've got an issue with it on the farm, and you have to start at home. And the first thing you need to regenerate is the profitability of the farm in many cases, and actually, getting that yield for as low a cost as possible. And the key things that we're seeing, certainly at Lamport and other places, is you have to try and get this crop competitiveness as much as possible when you're growing your wheat, and make sure that establishment is there. And at Lamport, they seem to have targeted getting one really, really good crop of first wheat, probably 1 year in 4, and then using other systems like spring crops and other crops like barley, as Kyle mentioned, that reduce the amount of expenditure and risk from that point of view, and do things that minimize the amount of opportunity that the blackgrass has got to grow. But some of the things we haven't spoken about tonight, and they're the things that I see, fairly regularly traveling around and helping people, are the more people are using, perhaps contractors, for example, is being really, really diligent on cleanliness of equipment. Because you could be doing a fantastic job, and if someone's coming on your farm with equipment that's got blackgrass attached to it, there can be a massive problem. I saw it earlier this year on a farm near Cambridge, and it was really clear. You could see where the equipment had come in the field and started on the headland. You could see as clear as day. That's where it was coming from. So, really get in with your contractors, talk to them, make sure it's as important to them as it is to you. And, even almost act like a sentry at the farm when they come in with this kit, because, you could be doing a really good job, and it takes 5 minutes of, carelessness or not being diligent enough, and you can undo lots and lots of work and huge amounts of expenditure that might go into it. In terms of that crop competition, minimum tillage and zero till is an ideal, but if you require some tillage to get your crop to grow effectively and quickly, to get that canopy growing and create that crop canopy, then you should absolutely do it. And as Kyle said earlier, blackgrass loves a pudding and a really sort of anaerobic system. And whilst I'm a huge fan of cover crops and what they can do for structure over the long term, we're seeing where people are putting in cover crops into sort of an early stage of this sort of regenerative approach to things. Actually, a little bit of soil disturbance at that point when the cover crop is going in, and then as little as possible when the cash crop goes in later. That works really, really well, because the cover crop grows better, and then you're not needing to disturb it again, and you can direct drill, ideally with a disc drill for the minimum disturbance, but time drills are fine in that early stage. So those are a couple of the things. Water management is crucial, and I go to a lot of places where they want to talk about cover crops, and it's very clear what we should be talking about is drainage, and that's not something I'm an expert on. But there's a symptomatic problem that drainage funding was stopped about 40 or 50 years ago, and the lifespan of a lot of the drainage systems that went in at that time were about 40 to 50 years. So we're getting to the end of the lifespan, and there hasn't been that level of investment, because I think most farmers would agree where fields need drainage, it pays back very well, but it's finding the money to do it. And I'm not pretending for a moment that's easy. I've made several comments to people who have the power to do something about it, about zero interest loans and so on. And I'm hoping that some of the bank work that's happening now in regenerative agriculture might facilitate some low interest rate loans, because where it's needed, drainage is absolutely a fundamental piece of having good soil health. What else was I going to say? A second. Yeah, so when we talk about soil structure and how it can help with blackgrass, obviously preventing that waterlogging is very important, and improving the biology through techniques such as cover cropping and so on are really, really helpful with that. But increasing the biology also increases things that eat blackgrass seeds and other weeds and pests and so on. There's a whole life cycle going on there, an ecosystem. So getting that going and that gas exchange is really, really important. But not just that, if you have a well-structured soil and you are using herbicides, they'll work better. your investment in money that's being spent on pre-emergence herbicides, they work far better in a soil that's well structured. They'll get into the soil, they won't sit on the top, they won't get washed away so easily. They'll get further into the ground. They'll get into the areas where the weeds are germinating. So all of that investment in this over the long term will make, if you're in a what you might call a conventional system rather than an organic system, that investment of money in things like herbicide, particularly preems, will work even better. So I'm quite worried that some of the talk, largely from people outside the farming industry, sort of seems to think that regenerative means organic, and I really don't think it has to. I just think we have to make sure that when we do use synthetic products, that we minimize their externalities as much as we possibly can. But if we just sort of go careering down the path of not using inputs and we tank our yields, what we'll find is actually the impact per unit of output actually goes up potentially. So, that won't achieve anything, and we'll need to farm more land to achieve the same amount, because no one's talking about, the population that we have. So, we have to deal with problems like blackgrass, and for many people that will include the use of, appropriate herbicides at the right time. But, we must use tools like a wider rotation, spring cropping, cover crops, and all those sorts of things to ease our reliance on chemistry, because frankly, we're seeing it every day that approach that's been there for the last 30-40 years just simply isn't working anymore. And I can remember in my first week of being at Harper Adams, we were talking about rotation, and the rotation, because of pressures and policies and so on and so forth, that's become far more simplified. And frankly, the other problem is that the alternative crops to wheat generally don't pay as well as wheat does. So you can, and oilseed rape, you can see why this has happened, but it's having unintended consequences, but they're very serious. So, to come back to the topic of blackgrass control, I think we all know the things that we need to do. Some of them are not very palatable. I was talking to David Purdy this morning about this, and he was saying you really have got to have a zero tolerance for bad patches of blackgrass in the field. Spray them off, And in Kyle's presentation, he was saying, that clearly needs to be in early June, not waiting till the problem's actually left the seed head. Get on early, just bite that bullet, take the pill, take the medicine, and maybe, put a cover crop into that area, because that area is clearly telling you something, that it's not in good shape. So put a summer cover crop in, which there's really good funding for now under SFI. Do something about it, but don't let that blackgrass seed in a patch. Just take that area out, because it's just going to make the whole field worse later on. And I said earlier, be really diligent on machinery and things like that coming onto the farm, and things like seed quality, that sort of thing. If you've got a problem, cleaning your own seed from a clean field and using that is a good way of doing it. But just buy seed from good reputable sources. There's plenty of them about, and you often hear people blaming seed comes onto the farm for that, but I'm not sure that there are many decent seed houses where that should be too big an issue. Kyle, did you have any sort of points that you want to come back on from what you were saying and the things I've raised?
Nothing in particular. I really like what you said. Regenerative doesn't have to mean organic. I really do think that's true, that keeping all the tools in the toolbox is really important if we're going to manage something as complex of an issue as blackgrass. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a really good point. I didn't mean to, eschew any herbicide use in my talk. I know you didn't say that, but I just wanted to get across the point that there is a lot of resistance, and there is trouble brewing on the horizon in that industrial space. So
Sure.
Hopefully getting folks to think about how we can maybe manage it and use those tools that we still have more effectively. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. It was really interesting. I had a chat with Gabe one day, and we were talking about soil health generally, and he said something that really stuck with me, which is that he's seen some of the best soil health he's ever seen on organic farms, but he's also seen some of the worst. And what his point was, it doesn't really matter what you label it. If you do it well, it can be really good, and if you do it badly, it can be terrible. So, it doesn't matter what we label things. If things are done intelligently, we'll get where we want to go. And it's why I worry a little bit about people trying to be too dictatorial about what regenerative means. I think it should be a set of principles rather than a set of processes, because then all that happens is the processes get dumbed down, and then they don't do the things they're supposed to do. I think there's a huge amount of things that we can learn from organics. That I think there are some fantastic principles and fantastic practices, and when done well, there's no question. It's a really, really good system. But Gabe was telling me about places in the States where at large scale they basically farm the land until all the nutrition in it is gone, and then they just abandon it and move on. But they claimed all the stuff that was grown on it was organic in the meantime. Well, that's not a proper organic farm, is it? That's not looking after the soil or doing anything regenerative. So it was just a way of extracting extra value and out of a label for a period of time. And I don't think anyone in this room wants to go down that path at all. But there are lots of things that we can do around soil health, and organic principles are something that will underpin a lot of them. But I certainly see in my work that if people think that where you want to take them is organic farming, they won't even set out on the journey. They just simply won't. They don't think that's appropriate for them, and they won't even start. So I think very much that we have to show people that a hybrid system, which is perhaps less damaging to the environment, produces something which is probably better for people in the long run, but still they have to be profitable, and that's the most important thing. You have to have a sustainable business.
Thanks, Ian. No, those are all really, really good points. So if you'd like, we can maybe throw it to a couple of our other guest panelists here who are farmers who have dealt with blackgrass in their own context. So I will now throw it to, let's say, John. Does that sound good? I think you're still on mute here. Sorry, John, I couldn't hear you. I think you're still on mute.
Is that better?
There we go. Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep dropping out, I think, but I'll try and keep going. Yeah, listening to that, I think I'm just about doing everything wrong, because I sort of live with blackgrass. I've sort of taken the view that I'm going to cut costs down to the bare minimum. I haven't put any pre-emergence on for about since 2019. And most of what I've done is accidental, because it was quite a wet winter then. We did the drilling and got the wheat in, but we couldn't get any pre-ems on. So the only thing we could do was wait till the spring, and I walked over it and we had a look at it, and we weren't too bad. So I didn't bother putting anything on for blackgrass. We just went on to broadleaf weed killers, and that's pretty much where I've gone ever since. And I'm in a fairly bad blackgrass area. We're split between heavy land and gravel land. Admittedly, the gravel land's not quite so bad for blackgrass, but the heavy land's quite bad. And I've just tried to cut costs ever since, really. So I've cut the nitrogen down, and last year I got it down to about 50 kilos a hectare. And from that, I sort of saw that the blackgrass never really got going. It was never a problem in the wheat, because it weren't being fed. And so I've come to the conclusion that if you're a conventional farmer, which I have been, and I've pushed it, and I can probably get 10 ton a hectare of wheat, maybe 1 year in 5 as an average, but we're in a dry area as well, so we're really reliant on the weather, and we need decent rains, I guess. I know we've had it this last couple of years, but we just can't rely on it. We're in the east, and it's predominantly dry most of the time. So if you do get rain when you want it, then you're going to get some decent yields, and then you have to feed it. We're on hungry land, so you have to push it. And then if you push it, you got to put more fungicides on, growth regulators to shorten it. It's all in the favour of the blackgrass. So I've come to the conclusion, well, I'm going to cut my costs to the bare minimum, and I've done it. So I'm not saying I'm beating blackgrass. I'm not. The blackgrass is there, and it seeds. But because I'm not feeding, I mean, my yields are down as well, but it's all comparative, really. So my costs are a bare minimum. My inputs, my outputs ain't brilliant either, but it's the initial cost. Everything that you do is upfront cost before you know what you're going to sell your crop for. And it seems at the moment our costs are going through the roof, but our outputs aren't. You know, what we're selling is coming down pretty quick, whereas the inputs are still going up. So it's something's not right somewhere, and there doesn't seem to be a shortage of food. So, you know, if I can, last year I got 5 ton a hectare on the wheat with very little inputs. This year I've actually gone down the organic route because I'm thinking, well, we can get money on SFI. I can get money for going into organics, and it makes sense to me. I mean, it's not going to make sense to everybody, and I guess you got to be a brave person to do it. I never wanted to go organic really, but now I'm organic. I've got to sort of stick with it now for 4 or 5 years and see how I go. And I think if I can, my soil's definitely improved over the years. I've been direct drilling for 4 or 5 years. And since I've not been putting so many pre-Ms on, I haven't had any disease problems. So I haven't put any fungicides on, no insecticides, no growth regulators. And you'd think that the blackgrass would overtake the wheat, but it's not, because the wheat's getting quite tall and the blackgrass is only sticking one tiller out. It's not bushing out like it would if you was putting a lot of nitrogen on it. So I guess I'm not any worse off really, and I've not got that upfront cost. I've not got a massive yield, but I'm not losing money over it. And I think at the end of the day, it's the end result that you want to look at, not pushing for high yields all the time. I mean, granted, if you're on some decent land and you can get 10 or 12 tons to the hectare fairly easily by pushing it, it's the right thing to do. But if you're on marginal land and your average yield's probably going to be 7 or 8 tons to the hectare, well, then it's a different scenario. But I don't think there's a lot of middle ground. You've either got to spend a lot of money on it, or you've got to more or less take as many costs out of it as you can. And that's what I'm thinking. So I don't know. Time will tell.
Yeah, great points, John. And I know we've spoken in the past, and you have kind of a 25-year mindset, right? You have a long-term management goal in mind. You know, you're not thinking year to year. You're thinking, how can I manage it today such that I can create that environment over 10, 20, 25 years so that blackgrass or other weeds don't thrive, right? So I was really encouraged when you told me that in our conversation.
I mean, blackgrass is less of a bother to me than now I've gone organic. I'd say thistles are far worse than blackgrass. Because I can't spray now. I mean, I really missed Roundup this year. It's probably the worst year you could go organic when we got a wet spring and a wet year. As soon as you move a bit of land, it rains on it and replants everything. So it's not been an easy year, organic wise. Not to start anyway.
Right. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your chat, George. If you don't mind following up with John, I know you've got a really interesting success story that you'd like to share, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Carl, and Ian and John. So we've had some successes. We've had a lot of failures as well. But we had a field, so we've been no-till now for 10 years. I would say where the soil structure is good, we've probably, we're winning the battle with blackgrass. Where the soil structure hasn't improved massively for whatever reason, we're staying still. We're not going backwards, but we're certainly not going forwards and improving the situation. But there is no doubt in my mind that just like Project Lamport, there are ways, non-chemical means of improving the situation, and I personally think it nearly all revolves around soil health and the soil structure. So we had a field in May 2021 which was absolutely lousy with blackgrass, and we decided to whole crop it. We took baled silage, so it was a field of wheat full of blackgrass. We cut it and baled it, let that green up again, and then we sprayed it off and we planted a cover crop. That cover crop was put in I think 1st or 2nd of July, and we were planning to graze it in sort of September time before putting wheat in, but we had a glut of grass at the time, so I never did, because being on our lower ground, which isn't fenced as well as it is up on the chalk, it was going to be a lot of extra work, a lot of hassle to get the cattle there. So we didn't graze it. The cover crop was standing about 6 foot tall, and we drilled directly into it and then sprayed it off after that. And we took some above ground biomass and sent it off for analysis, and we had nearly 7.5 tons of total dry matter that we sampled, equivalent, and the results came back. In that above ground biomass, we had 352 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, 50 kilos of sulfur, 34 of phosphorus, 258 of potassium, 220 of calcium, 13 of magnesium, 680 grams of manganese, plenty of copper, zinc, boron, and molybdenum. So that above ground biomass had drawn up and taken from the atmosphere all that, which wouldn't then be recycled for the following crop, but it would be available over time as it broke down. We planted that with winter wheat on the 11th of October in really good conditions. It did have a preem, but we never followed up with anything, and that was the cleanest that field has been in my lifetime, I think, from blackgrass point of view. We then followed up in 2023 harvest with spring oats, and we've just this year had a crop of wheat off it. Again, it had a full preem, but no follow-up grass weed control, and again it was clean, and it yielded just under 8 tons per hectare with 120 kilos of nitrogen put on it and no fungicide. So that's a real win, but a costly win at the time. As Ian said, now with SFI, to get some money for that summer cover, you're tipping the balance back in favour, and the cash flow isn't hit quite as hard as it was for me back in that summer, that we took a whole crop of silage and got no no wheat off it. The other successes, again, it's been mentioned before, but herbal lays. We put them in for 4 years, spray them off and direct drill straight into them. Often we've done that in the spring and grown a legume or oats, and then put it into wheat in the autumn. This year we've got one field that went into oats in the spring. We've also got a field that's gone straight into wheat coming out of the herbal lay. And in both situations, we've got a fantastic understory of white clover. And one of those fields I'm growing for wild farmed. So there will be no herbicides going on that at all now that it's in the ground. And it's only in the ground because there was a good understory of white clover that was able to keep the tractor and drill off the soil and allow us to travel in this wonderful dry, not autumn that we're having. Yeah, definitely those are the successes we've had. As I said earlier, where our soil structure is really good, the direct drilling, low disturbance direct drilling is definitely helping reduce any germination, much germination in the autumn. We've got a lot of spring cropping in our rotation. About 50% of our ground is spring cropped. I would hazard a caution on that. We do have a lot of blackgrass that now germinates in the spring. Like so many weeds or early successional plants, they find a way to get round a lot of things that we throw at them. And we've done a lot of spring cropping for a lot of years, and we've definitely bred for a different type of blackgrass in certain situations where it's germinating in the spring, when all the books tell you it doesn't. So that would be just a word of caution on thinking spring cropping is the answer. It certainly reduces it, but it throws up different problems.
Thanks, George.
George, can I ask? Can I just ask George something which, again, David Purdy and I were discussing earlier. He brought up the topic of row widths and people being very keen to go to slightly wider row widths, sort of 25 centimeters, so they can maybe do hoeing and things. But that reduces the competitiveness of the crop because you've got wider rows initially, so it has to grow more to meet in the row. Is that something that you see? Is that a technique you're trying to use, and what are your views on that?
Certainly, when we first went down the no-till route, we had a cross slot, and we were on, I think, 20 or 22 centimeter rows. I don't think that helped us. I think, you were leaving a lot of ground there open. The wheat wasn't closing the rows so quickly, less competitive. For the last 4.5 years, we've been using a John Deere 750, much closer row spacing. And I think it feels that is a benefit, the closer row spacing. We're not into row hoeing.
David will be pleased it's a John Deere machine, that's for sure.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean,
it does.
It makes complete sense. I mean, obviously, things like inter-row hoes sound good, and I'm sure they do have a place in some systems. But you can run into, probably unintended but highly predictable problems like that. And we see it where we're doing things like wild bird seed mixtures and so on, where we're trying to leave space for game birds to get in between the rows of mixtures that we put in, and we definitely do get more weed issues in those spaces, because where you leave a space, nature will fill it, won't it?
Yeah, and I think on top of that, clover understories. We've got a field that came out of a herbal lay a year and a half. Where are we? We've had a crop of winter wheat and a crop of spring wheat, both grown for wild farms, so they've had no herbicide on it. And 8 years ago, that was a pig of a field for blackgrass. And 4 years of herbal lay, 6 years ago, 4 years of herbal lay and 2 years with a clover understory has kept us on top of the problem. Getting that clover understory established in the first place from a standing start is not easy. In a no-till situation, bringing it out of a herbal lay, spraying it off with 2 to 3 litres of glyphosate and leaving the clover understory suppressed but comes back has worked for us. And we've, as I say, we've kept it for 2 years. I've stitched a bit of cover crop into it, and our cattle are going to go across it next week, and then that'll go into a spring crop next year.
I was on a farm yesterday, not far from the office, on some really nasty, heavy clay soil near Kettering, and we've had herbal lays on there for 2 or 3 years, and we had a penetrometer, and I literally could put that penetrometer into that field now with my thumb all the way down to the dial. It was remarkable. It really was incredible. And the soil structure under those, I'm very concerned about the dumbing down of the SFI herbal lay requirement compared to what the stewardship one was, because in stewardship it had to be far more multi-species. It had to be what I consider a true herbal lay, and now people are sort of saying, oh, it only has to be two grasses, 2 herbs, 2 legumes. Pardon my French, that's bullshit. I mean, that's really not a herbal lay. That's, it's a start, but it's not what we see. And people, oh, you sell this stuff, you just want to sell more things. It makes no difference to us. What the seed cost is more or less the same, but the magic is in the diversity, and you give yourself more cards at the table if you've got more species in there. And the way this soil has changed, I mean, I've been going on that farm for 20 years, and the current farm manager has sort of really got a grip of some of the things with these herbal lays, and it's absolutely transforming the soil in 2 to 3 years. And he's going to include herbal lays in his arable rotation. It's going wider and wider. They've got a really good contract on the farm who's doing the arable, who's well on board with it. It's a really good system, and we're trying to get more and more data about what's happening, how much return there is to the next crop, and that sort of thing, because ultimately it has to be a good economic decision. But there's absolutely no doubt at all that it's being good for the soil. I mean, you just see the life that's coming back into that really snotty, heavy clay. It's remarkable.
Yeah. Great points. Yeah. For those that think this idea that it's difficult for them to think that weeds, pest pathogens are our friends, they're co-creators, they have a job, that kind of thing, just putting it in terms like you did would make more sense to them, that they're tricky. And if you can continually trick them and don't get into a rotation and get into a rhythm, you're gonna confuse them, right? So widening that rotation, like you said, is such a huge part of this, because that's what they love. And what that kind of ties into what George was saying, that if we just move towards more spring cropping, well, they're going to figure that out too, right? They're smart, they're versatile. So we need to constantly be confusing them, or with the word you used, adding diversity into the system. So that's all very true. So thank you all. Thank you 3 for that. If anybody has any questions or wants to include them in the chat, please do so now. I see Sophia has one. So she has 2 questions / 1 predicament. 2 questions / predicaments. 1, SFI summer fallow precludes cutting or grazing. how do you prevent seed set of some of those fast-growing seeding species? So do either of you three want to touch on that? So summer fallow precludes cutting and grazing. How do we prevent seed set in that situation?
And Sophia, do you mean the summer cover crop option? Because that, that should, I think it does allow sort of for 2 weeks before you plant the next crop. And there are, if that's a particular concern to you, and I can understand that if you were growing a crop like winter barley, or perhaps you're growing rye for a biodigester or something, so you've got that opportunity to get those crops in really early, that there is a potential for seed return with some of the species. But actually, we're certainly seeing things like, buckwheat and so on. They're not really a big problem if you're going into wheat. If you're in an organic scenario, then that issue might be rather different. But in a conventional scenario, they don't seem to be causing any problems. There are some sort of areas of work that are going on around, nematodes and things like that. But my sort of real go-to are these multi-species mixtures, and where you go to other parts of the world where these things have been done for much longer, like France and in the States, the more diverse the species are, and the sort of lower the lower percentage of an individual species in a mix, the problems that people often talk about, they just don't seem to occur. And I would sort of say the advantages far outweigh the potential negatives. And one thing that not many people have cottoned onto, it seems, at the moment, is with the summer cover crop option now, you can stack that with the winter cover crop option, but it does have to be overseeded into the summer. So you can't plant 6 or 7 species at the beginning and say job done. You have to plant a summer cover crop and then oversow it with a winter cover crop, which is, it's a bit bizarre, but that's the only way it works. But that's clearly permitted, and it's actually it's very clear in the book. And we could suggest strategies for doing that. But as I say, if it's a real worry to you in an organic situation, I can understand why that would be. We could certainly find species that are very, very unlikely to cause you a problem in that regard. It just takes a bit of thinking about.
It's a companion crop in the following crop, isn't it? If it seeds and appears in the wheat, you've got a free companion crop.
So certainly be true of something like vetch, if you wanted it to be. Absolutely, yeah.
Trouble is with vetch though, that's a job getting out the seed, isn't it?
But I wouldn't let it go all the way through to harvest.
No, well, I've got a lot of options in organic.
Well, this is the difficulty, isn't it? This is why the context of what you're doing is so important. And you do need to think about that very carefully. In a conventional situation, getting rid of legumes in cereals in the spring is relatively easy, but obviously in an organic scenario, it's not. So
great points. Yeah. So she clarified, yes, summer cover crop. So, and then her second point was the trade-off between later sowing and increasing that risk of soil compaction. So that's absolutely true. Given our more unpredictable weather patterns here, a lot of those compaction events, the compaction of the soil happens mostly in singular events. So, 75, 80% of the compaction in a soil could be whenever you're driving out there, when soil conditions are wet and horrible like that. So absolutely, that's a trade-off to absolutely think about when thinking about later sowing to control that blackgrass. Does anybody have any words of wisdom on how to weigh the option between potential soil compaction and blackgrass control?
Arrange the weather. Haven't worked it out yet, but no, I mean, this year we didn't start drilling our winter cereals, and we were aiming to start sort of about the 23rd of September. It rained constantly from about the 20th of September, we started on the 14th. No, 13th of October. So, and yes, compaction will be a potential issue with some of our heavier ground, trying to get on it. Not easy.
We certainly had people last year in that very wet winter that had put in sort of summer cover crops or catch crops, and they were able to establish very successful autumn sown crops only because they hadn't cultivated and they had cover crops they could travel on that helped to carry the drill. Their soil acted in a far more sort of spongy way, and even on some really heavy clay, in Rutland, that was the case. So they were very lucky and very grateful to have that sort of cover crop there to help them along. But it's not something that you probably want to rely on in the early stages of doing this. But certainly as you build that resilience and that sort of structure into the soil, those things will give you more drilling days in a year. And we're seeing that on. I know John and George, I think, are both in base, and probably a number of other people in the room are as well. When you start talking to those people and they're still going and they say their neighbours aren't or whatever, it's not because they're not crowing and they're not being clever. They're just saying, a bit like, when I've seen Gabe doing talks and he says his neighbours aren't doing what he does, and I'm wondering what they're not seeing. It's quite strange. But it's not something that's going to happen immediately. It takes time. Again, some of the work David Purdy's exhibited on the Lamport thing is, some of these things, the first couple of years, there's almost no sign of anything changing, and then year 3 there was a change, and year 4 there was a really significant change. So it does take time. But anyone that doesn't think this stuff is helping, frankly, isn't paying attention, because there's plenty of evidence that it is. And the great thing about organisations like BASE and this is most of the voices are farmers telling other farmers how it's working. And, it's not because someone's trying to sell you a piece of kit or something. It's because it's working, and it's working really well and helping them become more profitable.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that and add to it that, there were only 2 ways we could have been drilling on Sunday when we were drilling. One was drilling on the green, so we had 3 fields we were drilling. One was the white clover understory I talked about. The other was a cover crop we got in very early, and that was sort of about 4 foot tall and kept the tractor off the soil. And the other was into some stripped oat straw, which again kept the tractor and drill off the soil. Without that, the only other way of drilling would have been a plough and power harrow, plough followed by a power harrow drill combination. That's literally the only options available in these conditions. So, yeah.
I didn't realise Gabe was in the audience tonight, but it looks like he is in the chat. So good evening, sir. Good to have you with us.
For those that didn't see, he said, Ian, they're not seeing my bank account. That's maybe the reason why his neighbors aren't switching. So here in the Q&A section, we might have time to answer 1 or 2 more. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So Alex Pearson asked, is there a place for using companion cropping cash crops with buckwheat, etc., alongside cover cropping and herbicide to further tackle blackgrass? And we've touched on that a bit, with George's clover understory, really creating some sort of competition. So I heard it said that shade is the best herbicide, really, that nature's ever created. So we really do need to think about creating that competition. But buckwheat specifically, guys, do you have any words of wisdom for that? I know the big touching point I always hear is that it's great at solubilizing phosphorus. So and it incorporates it with the mycorrhizal fungi and building soil aggregates, those types of things. But anything else on buckwheat would you guys like to share?
I like buckwheat. I think it's brilliant. It's always one of the first to get going when you drilled it. And I've actually took it to harvest and harvested it. So I had 4 or 5 ton last year that I've been using for my own seed. So yeah, it's brilliant. And the frost kills it as well. So the frost, we've had 1 or 2 little frosts and it has knocked it back. And what I've done this year is put buckwheat and bursting clover in before I was going to, well, where the winter wheat was going to go. And it's not a bad cover crop. And I could actually go direct drilling straight on it, on the heavy land or any other land. The only trouble I've got is because I can't use Roundup or any sprays, I really wanted to have a bit of a clean start. So my idea was that I'd direct drill it and then nip over it with a shallow cultivation after to kill the weeds and get any blackgrass out. But I just can't get that period of dry weather to go over it after I've drilled it. I don't want to be in the situation where I direct drill it and then not be able to get back on it. So it's just not been that window of opportunity to get a little bit of dry there after I've drilled it within, say, 3 days to nip over it and clean it out. So I'm just sitting on it and hoping for a decent November.
I think the question was about using it as a companion crop in another crop.
Yeah,
and
I don't know about companion.
In a conventional system, I can see 2 or 3 problems. One is it in a cereal, it wouldn't allow the use of pre-emergence herbicides in a conventional situation. The other thing about it is if you use it at any sort of seed rate to get a number of plants there, it's hellish competitive, and it could actually act in the way that you don't want a weed to do so. It could be potentially quite detrimental if you use enough to really cause the phosphate solubilizing effect. It might then become detrimental to the establishment of your cash crop. And also the time that you're planting your wheat is, as we saw this year, there was quite low temperatures in October. I don't know whether you'd actually get very good establishment at the same time. You'd have to plant it earlier and then probably drill the wheat into it and try and keep it alive. But then again, it goes back to the thing about pre-emergence herbicides again. And one thing on what John was saying about Berseem clover, particularly in an organic situation, be really careful to use what they call a single cut variety rather than a multi-cut, because the single cut ones, if you can get out there and do something mechanical, you'll kill it. But also they tend to get killed more effectively by the frost, whereas the multi-cut ones are designed to be cut and regrow, and they seem to be more frost hardy. So if we don't get a frost till later, I've seen it where people have used multi-cut varieties in oilseed rape and they've not used AstroCurb, which would kill it really effectively. It can become a problem in the spring, whereas the single cut types just don't cause that problem.
Thank you very much. I think Ben Adams has commented maybe something to add on to the conversation. So he said, drilling wheat into NUM3 legume fallow has worked well here this year. Carried the tractor and drilled well even within a week of 240 mils of rain. So thank you for that, Ben.
Yeah.
I think we will do one more question. So if we don't get to it, I'll make sure to copy and paste it and then get back to you. I think RO has your contact information, so I'll make sure to answer some of your questions. So the last one here pertains to John. Georgina asks, what's the protein on John's land? And do you think the blackgrass is generally getting better, worse in patches, or staying the same? How has it varied across the field?
I think the blackgrass is more or less, it might be increasing a little bit, but I've got legume fallows and herbal lays that I'm bringing into it where I've got really bad places, so they'll be in for 2 or 3 years. The protein, as in what the protein in the wheat with being organic, is pretty rubbish. It's only about 10.5%, something like that. So yeah, without putting nitrogen on it, do struggle getting the proteins up for milling. They are all milling varieties. They are all wheat that are home safe seed, and it's the same home safe seed that I've been using for about 4 years. So I haven't bought any seed in for the last 3 or 4 years. No seed at all.
All right. Thanks for that, John. Well, maybe we'll try to answer Sue's here real quick. So Sue asks, is there any research on the types of soil bacteria present where blackgrass is a big problem, in comparison with soils where blackgrass is not as big an issue? Is there a correlation between the soil biology and blackgrass predominance? Sue, that's a very good question. I don't know specifically about the soil bacteria. Like I was saying, a lot of the information on early successional species deals with the fungal populations, and what we see is those early successionals do really well when the fungal populations are low. Bacteria are typically there always at all times. They're very hardy. They're very small, so they can survive something like a tillage event. And if farmers are spraying fungicides, obviously that doesn't affect them because they're not fungus. So I would have to look into specifically about the bacteria, but what I do know is that those early successional landscapes have less diversity, they have less life, and that goes down to the microbial realm as well. So whatever it is, we want to promote as much diversity of life and as much life as we can, and to move it along and create that late successional soil environment. So does anybody have anything to add on that one?
No, I'm not aware of any work on that at the moment.
Yeah. Yep. All right, I'll take one last look here. Okay.
There was one from Louise about shading blackgrass, and that is a topic, a conversation that often comes up. And you have to remember that not all catch crops are the same, and there is an argument that the only thing that kills blackgrass is glyphosate, which is common topic of conversation again. So if you want your blackgrass to germinate within your within your cover crop, that's quite possible to do. You can encourage that by not having many broadleaf species in the mix. So you'd have things like black oats, maybe some linseed, some berseem clover, things that don't have big floppy leaves that shade them out. So then the blackgrass might well be encouraged. And if you're only having that crop growing there for say 8 weeks or something, then the blackgrass can often be encouraged to grow in that crop. You then spray that off with some glyphosate and direct drill straight into that clean surface, ideally with a disc drill like a 750 or something, and that can work really well. And I can't remember what the source of it, but I did see some work that was trying to be done that suggested that blackgrass got some, instead of allelopathic effect, it actually got a trigger to grow from exudates that were given out by cereal plants or grasses, effectively, to say that this is a good time to grow. So actually it might be, and I'm not saying it is, I'm throwing the question out there, it might be that having a cereal or a grass in that mix might be something. If you're trying to get that blackgrass to germinate early so you can kill it, that might be a useful tool. But as I say, that was an idea rather than evidence.
Well, I can add to that. I think if you got bare ground and blackgrass, your blackgrass is going to grow. Then if you spray it with glyphosate, you'll get another flush of blackgrass. And you can keep spraying it with glyphosate. You're still going to get a lot more blackgrass come. It's not. I don't think that's the answer at all. Cover crops, well, yeah, drown it out and put plenty of competition yet there, and that will probably slow the blackgrass down. But as soon as you've got bare ground, then blackgrass is like your first weed to come.
Yeah. No.
And it don't always work by spraying it with the Roundup. Really.
No. You've got to change the situation, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've got to change the environment that your crop's growing in and stop it becoming that compacted, wet, horrible swamp that blackgrass likes.
Yeah, that's where the cover crops and the herbal lays come in, because you're changing the environment that you're growing on following cropping.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. All great points. So last comment here is Niall Atkinson said they've successfully straw raked a growing cover crop at Lamport to stimulate that blackgrass. So thanks for that. Very good information. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to our panel, Ian, John, and George. Jake, would you like me to throw it back to you for one final word from Aro?
Yes, no, thanks very much to you for joining us this evening, and thanks to everybody in the audience for joining. Just to say that we'll be back next month on the 13th of November to look at dairy farming and whether regenerative agriculture can work for dairy farming, and asking specifically, is a milk yield penalty inevitable when building soil health? But until then, thanks very much, and yeah, hope to see you next time.